July 4th, 1776, a sweltering summer day in Philadelphia, where the air hangs heavy with humidity and anticipation inside the Pennsylvania State House. Delegates from the 13 American colonies, dressed in woolen coats and breeches despite the heat, gather in a wood-paneled chamber lit by flickering candles and sunlight streaming through tall windows. Quills scratch on parchment, voices murmur in heated whispers. At the front, John Hancock, the bold president of the Second Continental Congress, presides with a stern gaze. For over a year, these men have debated, plotted, and risked everything. Now they vote to adopt a document that will sever ties with the mightiest empire on earth. Thomas Jefferson's words echo in their minds. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. As the final approval rings out, bells toll across the city, and crowds cheer in the streets below. This is no mere proclamation. It's a declaration of war, a blueprint for a new nation, and a spark that will ignite revolutions worldwide. Welcome to Vestige Files, where we unearth the pivotal moments that shaped history. This is the story of the American Revolution and the signing of the Declaration of Independence, an epic of defiance, ideology, and the birth of a republic from the ashes of empire. To understand this bold leap into the unknown, we must rewind to the mid-18th century, when Britain's American colonies simmered with promise and peril. In the 1750s, the 13 colonies stretched along North America's eastern seaboard, from Massachusetts in the north to Georgia in the south. Home to about 2.5 million people, farmers, merchants, artisans, and enslaved Africans. They were a patchwork of cultures: English Puritans in New England, Dutch traders in New York, Quaker pacifists in Pennsylvania, and tobacco planters in Virginia. Tied to Britain by blood, trade, and law, the colonies thrived on exports like tobacco, rice, and indigo, importing manufactured goods in return. But loyalty masked growing strains. The 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, known in America as the French and Indian War, pitted Britain against France and its Native American allies for control of the continent. British victory expelled France from North America, securing lands east of the Mississippi, but at a staggering cost: £60 million in debt. To recoup, Parliament imposed taxes on the colonies, ignoring their lack of representation in London. No taxation without representation became the rallying cry. The 1763 proclamation line barred colonists from settling west of the Appalachians, angering land-hungry frontiersmen and speculators like George Washington, a Virginia surveyor and militia officer who'd fought in the war. Tensions escalated with the 1764 Sugar Act, taxing molasses, and the 1765 Stamp Act, requiring stamps on legal documents and newspapers. Riots erupted. The Sons of Liberty, led by Samuel Adams in Boston, burned effigies and tarred tax collectors. Parliament repealed the Stamp Act in the 1766, but asserted dominance with the Declaratory Act, claiming full authority over the colonies. Enter the key architects of revolution. George Washington, born in 1732 in Virginia, was a tall, imposing planter with military experience from the frontier wars. Reserved yet commanding, he owned Mount Vernon, relying on enslaved labor, and served in Virginia's House of Burgesses. Thomas Jefferson, 33 in 1776, was a brilliant polymath from Virginia. Lawyer, architect, inventor, educated at William and Mary, influenced by Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke and Montesquieu. His ideas on natural rights would define the era. John Adams, a stout Massachusetts lawyer born in 1735, was a fiery orator and cousin to Samuel Adams, the radical brewer who organized protests. Benjamin Franklin, 70 by 1776, was the colony's elder statesman, a Philadelphia printer, inventor, and diplomat who'd spent years in London lobbying for colonial rights. Richard Henry Lee, a Virginia planter, and Roger Sherman, a Connecticut cobbler turned judge, rounded out the voices pushing for change. These men from diverse backgrounds united against perceived tyranny. The 1767 Townshend Acts taxed imports like tea, glass, and paper, sparking boycotts. In Boston, troops quartered to enforce order clashed with locals. On March 5, 1770, the Boston Massacre saw British soldiers fire on a mob, killing 5, including Crispus Attucks, an African-American sailor, the first martyr of the cause. Paul Revere's engraving inflamed passions. Parliament repealed most Townshend duties but kept the tea tax, leading to the 1773 Tea Act, favoring the East India Company. On December 16, 1773, Sons of Liberty disguised as Mohawk Indians dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. The Boston Tea Party. Britain's response, the 1774 Intolerable Acts, closing Boston's port, revoking Massachusetts' charter, and allowing trials in England. Colonists convened the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia that September, petitioning King George III for redress while organizing boycotts. Militias drilled, Minutemen stockpiled arms. By April 1775, the powder keg ignited. On April 19, 1775, British General Thomas Gage sent 700 troops to seize colonial arms at Concord, Massachusetts. Warned by Revere and William Dawes' midnight rides, 77 Minutemen confronted them at Lexington. The shot heard round the world rang out. 8 colonists died. At Concord's North Bridge, militia repelled the Redcoats, who retreated to Boston amid sniper fire, suffering 273 casualties to the colonists' 95. The revolution had begun. In May, the Second Continental Congress assembled in Philadelphia, assuming governmental powers. They appointed Washington commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, besieging Boston. Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold captured Fort Ticonderoga, seizing cannon. On June 17th, the Battle of Bunker Hill, actually Breed's Hill, saw colonists under William Prescott hold off British assaults before retreating, inflicting over 1,000 casualties. Though a British victory, it proved colonists could fight. King George III declared the colonies in rebellion that August, hiring Hessian mercenaries. In January 1776, Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense sold 100,000 copies, arguing for independence. 'Tis time to part. Support swelled. In North Carolina, patriots crushed loyalists at Moores Creek Bridge in February. By spring, British evacuated Boston after Washington fortified Dorchester Heights with Ticonderoga guns. Momentum built toward separation. The push for independence intensified. On June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee introduced a resolution in Congress that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. Debate raged. Moderates like John Dickinson feared war's horrors, while radicals like Adams pressed on. Congress postponed the vote, appointing a committee of 5, Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, Sherman, and Robert R. Livingston, to draft a declaration justifying the break. Jefferson, secluded in a Philadelphia boarding house, penned the bulk over 17 days, drawing on Locke's ideas of life, liberty, and property, revised, to Pursuit of Happiness, and Virginia's Declaration of Rights by George Mason. He listed 27 grievances against King George III, dissolving assemblies, imposing taxes, quartering troops, and more. Adams and Franklin suggested edits, softening attacks on the British people, removing a condemnation of slavery to appease Southern delegates. On June 28th, the committee presented the draft. As Congress debated, external pressures mounted. British Admiral Richard Howe arrived off New York with 32,000 troops, the largest expeditionary force in history, aiming to crush the rebellion. Washington rushed his 19,000 ill-trained men to defend the city. On July 1st, debate resumed. Adams delivered a marathon speech defending independence. Dickinson countered eloquently. The next day, July 2nd, 12 colonies voted yes. New York abstained, later concurring. Independence was declared. Over July 3rd to 4th, Congress revised the document, cutting a quarter of Jefferson's text, including anti-slavery passages. On July 4th, they adopted the final version, the Declaration of Independence. John Hancock signed boldly as president. Secretary Charles Thomson attested. Printed broadsides by John Dunlap spread the news. 200 copies distributed to armies, assemblies, and public readings. In New York on July 9th, Washington's troops heard it, toppling a statue of George III. Bells rang, bonfires blazed, but conflict loomed. Not all signed immediately. Most of the 56 delegates affixed signatures on August 2nd, with some later. Thomas McKean signed last in 1781. Signers risked treason, hanging if captured. They hailed from varied walks: 24 lawyers, 11 merchants, 9 farmers, including 2 future presidents, Adams, Jefferson. Ages ranged from 26, Edward Rutledge, to 70, Franklin. 9 died before victory, 5 were captured. The Declaration's adoption didn't end the fight. It escalated it. Britain struck hard. In August 1776, the Battle of Long Island routed Washington, who evacuated 9,000 men across the East River in fog-shrouded silence. New York fell. The British occupied it for 7 years. Washington retreated through New Jersey, his army dwindling to 3,000 ragged souls by December. Crossing the icy Delaware River on Christmas night, he surprised Hessians at Trenton, capturing 900, a morale boost. A week later, victory at Princeton followed, but 1777 brought setbacks. British General William Howe captured Philadelphia in September after Brandywine Creek. Congress fled to York. Washington wintered at Valley Forge, where 2,500 died from cold and disease. But Baron von Steuben drilled troops into a professional force. Meanwhile, in the north, British General John Burgoyne's invasion from Canada faltered. At Saratoga in October 1777, American General Horatio Gates surrounded him, forcing surrender of 5,800 troops, the war's turning point. It convinced France to ally with America in 1778, providing troops, ships, and funds under the Treaty of Alliance, negotiated by Franklin in Paris. Spain joined in 1779, the Dutch in 1780. The war globalized, naval battles in the Caribbean, sieges in Gibraltar. Internal divisions deepened conflict. Loyalists, 20% of colonists, faced tar and feathering property seizures. Many fled to Canada or Britain. Others formed regiments like the Queen's Rangers. Native Americans split. Iroquois nations fractured, with Mohawk leader Joseph Brant raiding for Britain, while Oneida allied with Patriots. African Americans sought freedom. Lord Dunmore's 1775 proclamation offered liberty to enslaved people joining Britain. Thousands fled plantations, forming the Ethiopian Regiment. Patriots like Washington eventually armed free blacks and promised freedom to some enslaved recruits. Women contributed. Abigail Adams urged her husband to remember the ladies. Deborah Sampson fought disguised as a man. Economic woes plagued the Continentals. Inflation soared. Congress printed worthless money. Traitors emerged. Benedict Arnold defected in 1780, plotting to surrender West Point. Yet resilience shone. In the South, British General Charles Cornwallis won at Camden, but suffered guerrilla hits from Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, and Nathaniel Greene's attrition strategy. By 1781, Cornwallis entrenched at Yorktown, Virginia. Washington and French General Rochambeau marched south. Admiral de Grasse's fleet blockaded the Chesapeake. The October 19th siege ended with Cornwallis's surrender. 7,000 troops, the war's decisive blow. With Yorktown's fall, Britain's will crumbled. Prime Minister Lord North resigned. Peace talks began in Paris. The 1783 Treaty of Paris recognized American independence, setting boundaries from the Atlantic to the Mississippi, Canada to Florida. Evacuations followed. 80,000 loyalists emigrated, including 15,000 enslaved people freed by Britain. The war claimed 25,000 American lives, 1% of the population, mostly from disease. Britain lost 24,000. The Continental Army disbanded. Washington resigned his commission in 1783, astonishing Europe by yielding power. The Declaration's ideals faced tests. The 1781 Articles of Confederation, America's first constitution, proved weak. No executive, no tax power, leading to Shays' Rebellion in 1786, where Massachusetts farmers protested debts. In 1787, delegates convened in Philadelphia for the Constitutional Convention. Franklin Washington presiding, James Madison and Alexander Hamilton crafted a stronger framework, ratified in 1788. The Bill of Rights, 1791, echoed the Declaration's rights. Yet contradictions lingered. Slavery endured, enshrined in the Constitution's 3/5 clause. Women remained disenfranchised. Native lands were seized via treaties like Fort Stanwix, 1784. The Declaration's legacy rippled globally. Its words, "All men are created equal," inspired the French Revolution in 1789, with the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Haitian slaves under Toussaint Louverture invoked it in their 1791 revolt, achieving independence in 1804, the first successful slave uprising. Latin American liberators like Simón Bolívar cited it in wars against Spain from 1810 to 1825. In Europe, 1848 revolutions echoed its calls for self-government. Domestically, abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, in his 1852 speech, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?" challenged America to live its creed. The 1863 Emancipation Proclamation and 13th Amendment, 1865, advanced equality amid civil war. Suffragists at Seneca Falls in 1848 paraphrased it in their Declaration of Sentiments, fueling women's voting rights in 1920. Civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963's "I Have a Dream" invoked it as a promissory note. Globally, over 100 nations' founding documents borrow from it, from Vietnam's 1945 declaration against France to Zimbabwe's 1979 independence. Human costs were profound. Families divided, Benjamin Franklin's son William, a loyalist governor, exiled to England, never reconciled. Widows like Molly Pitcher, Mary Hayes, who manned cannons at Monmouth in 1778, embodied sacrifice. Enslaved people like James Armistead Lafayette spied for patriots, earning freedom. Native leaders like Dragging Canoe of the Cherokee resisted encroachment, waging the Chickamauga Wars into the 1790s. Economically, the revolution birthed a market economy, but debt-burdened states. Culturally, it fostered republicanism, virtue over monarchy, seen in symbols like the Liberty Bell, cracked during 1835 tolling. Education expanded. Universities like Yale trained leaders. The frontier opened, spurring westward expansion, but at indigenous expense. The 1787 Northwest Ordinance banned slavery there, but displaced tribes. Today, the Declaration resides in the National Archives, its faded ink a reminder of fragility. Debates persist. Its equality promise unrealized for many, sparking movements like Black Lives Matter. Brexit echoes anti-imperial themes. Global democracies cite it amid authoritarian rises. The American Revolution and Declaration of Independence transformed a colonial backwater into a beacon of liberty, proving ideas could topple empires. Washington, Jefferson, Adams, their choices forged a nation, but at costs of blood and betrayal. Was the Declaration a timeless ideal of human rights, or a flawed document that sowed inequality? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this saga of revolution stirred you, hit that like button, subscribe to Vestige Files, and ring the bell for more stories of history's turning points.